Why, when, and how men rape. According to a study in South Africa, over 27% of men have allegedly forced a woman to have sex with them against their will. The study says this stems from sexual entitlement, boredom, and you can believe this, entertainment and punishment against girlfriends and other women or partners. Now, most men who have committed sexual assault have done so more than once, often beginning as teenagers. Some of these men have yet to face the consequences of their actions. For more on this scary reality in our country, we've got researchers Professor Rachel Jewkes from the South African Medical Research Council and Yandisa Sikweyiya from the Gender and Health Research Unit at SAMRC. Thank you very much to both of you for joining us this morning. And Prof. Jewkes, I'm going to start with you. Yesterday, I watched a documentary on Strangers You Know, and it was an episode of the Anine Booysen rape and murder that took place in 2014. And the brutality of that, because I think many of us would have forgotten how brutally she was raped and murdered, really startled me and made me wonder, what is it about a man and his mindset that would make him think it's okay to inflict such pain and torture upon another human being? What have you found in your engagements on this particular topic?
Well, it's a very important question, and I think it's, that many of your viewers and listeners will remember the horrible case of Anine Booysen and the equally ghastly case of Cabo Po that's just happened in the last week. And I think it's very important to see rape as happening in a range of different extremes of violence, and to remember that all forms of rape connected, and underneath them is our patriarchal structure of society and the sort of privileged position of men over women. But at the same time, it isn't your average man who commits these appalling offences that we've seen with the case of Little Bacabo and with Anine. And one of the very important aspects of the extreme brutality there is that these types of acts are committed by men who themselves have normally had been on the receiving of extreme brutality, and not just physical violence, but emotional violence, and very often sort of emotional torture, if you like, and sexual violence themselves. And I think it's incredibly important that we understand the way in which the behaviour of individuals towards children can mock those children, so that they are, as they grow up, unable to grow up and behave as pro-social members of our society, and they become able to commit these extreme acts of violence, and to do so in the most case without remorse, with a feeling of that in some ways it's justified because they externalise the blame for what they've done onto the young woman in the case of Anine. And so we see this as an enactment of somebody who essentially has been very damaged, usually due to the way in which they experience life as children.
Yandisa, I mean, there are some underlying themes that the Prof has just raised there in terms of masculinity, manhood, insecurities that may exist, trauma from childhood traumas. And I just wonder, what does that do to the psyche that channels this violent energy into the perpetration of rape and murder and other forms of abuse against the opposite gender? I mean, you've written quite a bit around these themes, and I'm sure you've had insights with people that have perpetrated, and perhaps other researchers like yourself.
Thank you, Rafiwa, and greetings to your viewers. I think Professor Jewkes has really provided really good insights of the men who perpetrate this kind of violence. And indeed, it's men who have really, as well, have really difficult childhood, traumatic childhood, and they've been exposed to violence themselves. They've been exposed to neglect, emotional neglect, and also just violence generally in their communities. And also, I think the most important thing is really, the question of socialization of men, of young boys, into very violent forms of masculinity, and also, socialization into gender norms that really, promote gender inequality, and a perception that women are, naturally inferior and subordinate to men. And this gender socialization that happens amongst young boys in our country and elsewhere, really, we've seen this. It really makes them to construct these very violent masculinities, and masculinity that makes them to believe that they have, sexual entitlement to women's bodies, and that they can really access a woman's body at any time, for fun, for boredom, and because they can really. And this amongst them, this rape culture amongst men, really, celebrates this kind of manhood. And boys really grow up thinking this is the right way of being a boy and a man. And it really highlights the need to really do a lot of intervention amongst boys and men, which, as the unit at the South African Mental Research Council, we have really tried to embark on and develop interventions that are gender transformative, to really shift these violent masculinities into more peaceful masculinities that are non-violent, that really espouses respect for women and girls.
I want to stick with you, Dr. Sikweyiya, in terms of just giving us a couple of those interventions that you think are important in altering the mindsets that a lot of men and boys grow up with. What are some of the important interventions that you think would immediately start to turn the tide somewhat?
With the leadership of Prof. Jewkes, we've started quite a while back, to develop an intervention and really evaluate this intervention called Stepping Stones, that was tested in rural Eastern Cape. And this intervention was found in that context to be effective in reducing men's perpetration of violence against their partners and non-partners, including rape. And we have also taken this intervention, the stepping stones, and creating future stepping stones to other contexts like informal settlements, where we've also seen as well that this intervention is really effective in reducing male-perpetrated sexual violence against women. And what we've done in the last few or so years, probably 7 years or so, was embarked on a bigger study where this intervention was adapted for other regions in the within the LMICs, low in middle income countries. And interventions that had that element have really shown that this intervention is effective. And remember, this is an intervention that was developed in South Africa and was tested in our setting to be very effective in preventing this. It is an evidence-based intervention that is readily available. And what I would really like to emphasize is the need to have this intervention to be scaled up and implemented, and for men and boys to be exposed to this intervention, so that we can really affect, especially boys when they are still very young, to really understand that there is a different way of being a boy and therefore a man. And you can really have alternative and peaceful masculinities that really respect women and girls.
Mm-hmm. Prof. Jewkes, as Dr. Sikweyiya talks, one wonders about the role of prison reform. There's been debate for years around prison reform, and those men that do get convicted and imprisoned, does the jail system or the prison system in the country rehabilitate them or perpetuate these traditional norms? And I say that in inverted commas because these are not necessarily norms that men are taught to be a certain certain way towards women. And it just brings into question, like I say, prison reform and the institution that these people are incarcerated in, changing that norm and the mindset, you know, so that they come back into society and have a different view of a woman. And I speak this with Bogabo Powe's case, in that he was on bail for another rape case. So he had been out of jail and still perpetrated the exact same crime. So one wonders about the system.
Yes, I mean, I heard he was on bail for another case, but I think that case may not have been concluded, so he may not have been in prison. But we know that our prisons are really brutalizing places, and they are not places for making more gender equitable and soft masculinities. In fact, quite the opposite. And I understand that there is very little rehabilitation that takes place and very little support for people when they leave prison. And you can imagine that if somebody has gone to prison and has committed offences that relate to their terrible socio-economic circumstances, and we have to be honest that so many people in our country do live in very poor socio-economic circumstances. But without support, it's hard to see how people won't go on and offend again. But we also need to understand that only a tiny proportion of rapists ever go to jail. I mean, even when cases are reported to the police, and we know a very small proportion, our research shows between 1 in 15 and perhaps even 1 in 25 women who experience rape ever see their perpetrator actually jailed. So very few men are jailed. And we see that report the case to the police. And even when cases are reported, it's only about 6 to 8% that ever result in the perpetrator being convicted and being jailed for a sexual offence. And so very, very few men who rape are very seriously punished for that. And we really need to improve the way in which the criminal justice system operates and enable it to provide real justice for women and girls who experience rape, because that is very far from.
Yeah, Prof. Jewkes, it actually brings in an important topic that you've touched on numerous occasions in terms of intimate partner rape violence that is on the rise in South Africa. And one would say that intimate partner violence that takes place is one of the reasons we're not seeing as much reportage as we could, because it's an intimate partner and the resolution within the family is to let's resolve this within the household. Your thoughts on that rise and the impact that it has on consequences and consequent management on rape in South Africa?
There is a huge problem with intimate partner rape, and including gang rape. And we really do want to see those cases reported to the police and actually have the criminal justice system come to bear to stop the rape and bring justice for the women. But it's also the case that there are a lot of women who are raped by men who are not partners, who either don't report it to the police or experience pressure to drop charges. And some of the reasons are that they fear being blamed, they fear that they won't get sympathy if they report cases to the police, and sometimes they fear that they'll experience retaliation from the perpetrator of the rape. And we know that all of these things occur. So they're not empty fears, they're very real fears. And we really need to create a climate within our communities, as well as within the police force, where when a woman is raped, we fairly and squarely blame the rape on the person who perpetrated the rape, and that we rally round to protect her. Because at the moment the situation is when a woman's raped, it's very common for somebody to say, well, we weren't there, we don't know whether it happened. And then you see the social support circling around the man, and the woman is left out on, or at worst is blamed and experience is extreme difficulty as a result of trying to report a rape.
Thank you very much, Professor Rachel Jewkes and Dr. Yandisa Sikweyiya from the South African Medical Research Council, joining us this morning to discuss that all-important topic around violence against women and children, its rise and what needs to be done to stop it.